There is an invisible force operating behind the scenes of your life. It makes decisions for you, sabotages your relationships, determines your limits, and dictates your fears. You've been carrying it since childhood, fed it with each rejection, each unprocessed shame, each part of yourself you learn to hide. Psychologists call this the shadow, the unmapped territory of the psyche where all the aspects of ourselves that we deny, repress, or simply never had the courage to confront reside. And here's the disturbing truth. For most people, the shadow isn't just a passive presence waiting to be discovered. It's active, influential, and in many cases, completely in control. Right now, as you believe you're making conscious choices about your life, your career, your relationships, it may be that a rejected part of you is driving the wheel, leaving your consciousness merely watching through the window. The question isn't whether you have a shadow. We all do. The question is it running your life without you realizing it? Today, we're going to explore 7 unmistakable signs that your shadow has emerged from the darkness and taken control of your existence. And more importantly, we'll reveal how recognizing these patterns is the first step toward reclaiming your psychological autonomy. Before we identify the signs, we need to understand what the shadow really is. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped this territory, described the shadow as the repository of everything we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. It's not just negative aspects, although those are the most obvious. The shadow also contains undeveloped potentials, denied talents, and parts of our personality that were suppressed because they didn't fit family or social expectations. Imagine a child who's naturally expressive and loud, but grows up in a home where silence and restraint are valued. That child quickly learns that their spontaneity is unacceptable, so they bury it, push it down out of consciousness. But that energy doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the shadow, operating behind the scenes, emerging in distorted forms, perhaps as an inexplicable anxiety when they need to express themselves in public, or as severe judgment against people who are spontaneous. The mechanism is always the same. What we cannot accept in ourselves, we project, deny, or transform into symptoms. And when these patterns accumulate over decades, when layer upon layer of rejected aspects pile up in the shadow, it becomes powerful enough to not just influence, but completely direct our life. The signs we're about to explore now are not character flaws. They are messages from the psyche, signals that deep integration needs to happen. The first sign that your shadow is in command manifests in your emotional reactions, specifically when you experience intense and disproportionate responses to relatively small situations. You find yourself exploding at a coworker over a harmless comment, feeling overwhelming rage when someone drives slowly in front of you, or experiencing deep hurt over constructive criticism that should be neutral. These disproportionate reactions are psychological flags that something deeper has been triggered. When your emotional response significantly exceeds the present stimulus, it's because the current event touched an old wound, an unresolved part of your history residing in the shadow. The coworker who made that comment isn't really the problem. They merely reactivated the memory of that critical parent, that humiliating teacher, that moment of public shame you never fully processed. Your shadow is responding not to the present situation, but to an unresolved emotional file. And here's the crucial element. You don't realize this in the moment. You genuinely believe that your anger, your hurt, your defensive reaction are totally justified by current circumstances. You construct elaborate narratives explaining why that person was wrong, why you had every right to react that way. But if you could see the pattern from above, you'd see that you're repeating the same reaction in different contexts, with different people, whenever a certain psychological button is pressed. The shadow operates through these automatic triggers. It hijacks your emotional response system before your consciousness can rationally evaluate the situation. And the more times you react this way without awareness, the more fortified this pattern becomes, until you become someone known for having a short fuse, for being too sensitive, for exploding out of nowhere. But you're not exploding out of nowhere. You're expressing decades of unprocessed emotional material that your shadow has kept compressed and that now escapes violently through any crack in your psychological armor. The second sign is equally revealing, but usually harder to recognize in yourself. It's the tendency to see in others precisely those qualities you most deny in yourself. Jung called this projection, and it's one of the shadow's favorite mechanisms. It works like this. The aspects of you that were banished to the shadow don't completely disappear from your perception. Instead, you begin to see them intensely in the external world, particularly in other people. If you buried your own ambition because you learned it was selfish to want more, you'll find yourself constantly criticizing ambitious people, seeing them as manipulative or calculating. If you repressed your sexuality because you were taught it was improper, you'll become hyper-aware and judgmental of others' sexual behavior. The psychological irony is cruel. The more you vehemently deny a characteristic in yourself, the more intensely you'll perceive and condemn it in others. Observe your most passionate criticisms. Observe the types of people who irritate you without clear reason. Observe the behaviors you find particularly unbearable. These are not neutral observations about the world, they are mirrors showing the content of your shadow. And here's where this becomes a life problem. When you're constantly projecting, you're not seeing the real people in front of you. You're seeing distorted versions of them, filtered through your own internal denial. This destroys relationships, creates unnecessary conflicts, and keeps you trapped in a cycle of judgment and separation. Worse still, while you're busy criticizing these characteristics in others, you remain completely blind to how they operate in you. The person who constantly criticizes others' dishonesty often deceives themselves in subtle ways they can't see. The person who severely judges others' weakness doesn't recognize their own unacknowledged vulnerabilities. This doesn't mean everything you observe in others is projection, but when your reaction is disproportionate, when you feel compelled to comment, judge, or repeatedly criticize something, when you simply can't let something go, it's likely your shadow is using that person as a screen to project your own unresolved material. The third sign manifests as a pattern of self-sabotage that seems mysterious on the surface. You set goals, work toward them, and then, at the critical moment, you find a way to destroy your own progress. You're about to finalize that important project and suddenly start procrastinating. You're developing a healthy relationship and inexplicably begin creating conflict or distancing yourself. You're close to achieving financial success and make an impulsive decision that undermines everything. Superficially, these seem to be mistakes, bad luck, or external circumstances. But when you observe the pattern over time, an uncomfortable truth emerges. You are systematically preventing your own success. This is the shadow operating through what psychologists call the upper limit, an invisible ceiling beyond which you unconsciously refuse to thrive. This limit wasn't established by conscious choice. It was programmed into your shadow through messages received in childhood, experiences of punishment when you excelled, or family identifications where success was associated with loss of connection or love. Perhaps you grew up in a family where there was implicit loyalty to financial struggle, and having success would feel like betrayal. Perhaps you were punished as a child for standing out, receiving the message that visibility is dangerous. Perhaps you internalized the belief that good people shouldn't have much when others have little. Whatever the origin, your shadow now contains a part that genuinely believes you don't deserve success, that it's dangerous to achieve your goals, that there's something fundamentally wrong with you prospering, and this part actively sabotages any movement toward expansion. The most insidious aspect of this is that sabotage rarely feels deliberate. It comes disguised as perfectly logical reasons. You had to procrastinate because you weren't ready yet. You had to create conflict in the relationship because there were real problems that needed to be addressed. You had to make that bad financial decision because it seemed like the right thing at the moment. But when you look honestly at the repetitive pattern, when you see that there's always a reason why you can't have what you say you want, you begin to see the shadow's hand operating behind the scenes of your life. The fourth sign reveals itself in your relationship patterns. You keep attracting the same type of person, repeating the same destructive dynamic, ending relationships for the same reasons, just with different faces. You swear this time will be different, that you've learned from past mistakes, that this new person is completely different from previous ones. And then 6 months later, you find yourself in the same familiar situation, having the same arguments, feeling the same frustrations.
This is one of the clearest signs that your shadow is choosing your partners, not your consciousness. The shadow has a magnetic attraction to certain relationship configurations because it's trying to resolve old wounds through new people. If you have unresolved abandonment in your shadow, you'll be attracted to emotionally unavailable people, creating repeated opportunities to experience and hopefully heal that original abandonment. If you have very deep shame, you'll attract critical people who reactivate that shame, giving you chances to finally confront it. The psyche operates through this principle of compulsive repetition. It keeps creating variations of the same scenario until you finally wake up, recognize the pattern, and do the necessary internal work. But here's the problem. Most people don't wake up. They simply blame the previous partner and look for the next one, without realizing they're carrying an unconscious relationship template that guarantees the same outcome. Your shadow contains not just unhealed wounds, but also the defensive strategies you developed in response to those wounds. If you were betrayed as a child by trusting someone, your shadow may contain hypervigilance and distrust as protective mechanisms. So, you enter relationships already expecting betrayal, interpreting neutral behaviors as suspicious, creating self-fulfilling prophecies where your distrust eventually pushes the partner away, confirming your belief that people aren't trustworthy. You don't see that you yourself are creating the outcome you fear. You only see that once again, you are right not to trust, and the cycle reinforces itself. The only way out of this pattern is to develop sufficient awareness to see that you're not simply attracting the wrong partners. You're being attracted to people because they resonate with unresolved configurations in your shadow. And until you bring these configurations to light, process the originating wounds, and update your relationship strategies, you'll continue repeating the same movie with different actors. The fifth sign moves from the psychological to the somatic, revealing how the shadow doesn't just live in the mind, but is deeply inscribed in the body. You experience persistent physical symptoms, chronic tensions, pains without clear medical cause, or illness patterns that seem to correlate with certain emotional states or life situations. The mind-body connection isn't metaphor, it's neurobiology. When you consistently repress certain emotions, thoughts, or aspects of yourself, that psychic energy doesn't evaporate. It converts into somatic tension, manifesting as back pain, migraines, digestive problems, chronic fatigue, or a series of other symptoms. Wilhelm Reich was one of the pioneers of somatic psychology, called this muscular armor, the way the body hardens to contain repressed emotions and impulses. Observe where you carry chronic tension. Constantly elevated shoulders may be holding unexpressed anger. A clenched jaw may contain words you never allowed yourself to say. Lower back pain may be literally carrying the weight of responsibilities you assume but deeply resent. These aren't merely mechanical problems. They are coded messages from your shadow trying to call attention to what you are withholding. And here's the revealing pattern. Symptoms often intensify when you're about to express something authentic, when you're close to allowing a repressed part of you to emerge, or when you're in situations that resemble the context where the original repression happened. The person who developed the belief that their needs don't matter may develop chronic fatigue symptoms, the body literally refusing to continue sustaining a life that ignores its fundamental requirements. The person who swallowed years of anger may develop digestive problems, the body manifesting the inability to process what was emotionally forced down. The most challenging aspect of this is that purely physical treatments rarely completely resolve these symptoms, because the root cause is in the shadow, not in the body alone. You can take medication for pain, do physical therapy for tension, but while the underlying psychological pattern remains untouched, symptoms return or migrate to another area. Genuine healing requires recognizing the symptom as messenger, asking what it's trying to communicate about repressed aspects of the self.
The sixth sign manifests through compulsive behaviors and addictive tendencies that seem to have a life of their own. You find yourself compulsively checking social media, eating even when you're not hungry, working to exhaustion, buying things you don't need, or engaged in any repetitive behavior You do not by conscious choice, but by an uncontrollable internal need. These compulsions are the shadow's language, attempting to regulate emotional states you don't know how to process directly. Each addiction, each compulsion, is serving a psychological function, usually related to avoiding confrontation with painful aspects of the shadow. The person who works compulsively may be fleeing from feelings of inadequacy or emptiness that emerge when they stop. The person who compulsively eats may be trying to fill an emotional void or suppress unwanted feelings through physical satiation. The person who is constantly in casual relationships may be avoiding real intimacy because their shadow contains terror of vulnerability. The pattern is always the same. There's something in the shadow that is so intolerable that you've developed an automatic behavior to never have to feel it directly. And the more you engage in compulsive behavior, the more you reinforce avoidance, and the more power the shadow gains over your life. The insidious aspect of addictions and compulsions is that they create an illusion of control while actually demonstrating total loss of agency. You believe you're choosing to check your phone, choosing to work late, choosing that extra glass of wine, but if you try to stop, if you try to simply not do the behavior for a period, you'll discover it's not a choice at all. It's a compulsion, an automated pattern your shadow uses to regulate your internal state. And behind the compulsion, there's always psychological content waiting to be processed. Boredom masking loss of meaning, anxiety covering existential fear, emptiness pointing to parts of you that were never developed or expressed. Recovery from any addiction or compulsion eventually requires confronting this shadow material. You can use willpower to stop the behavior temporarily, but without processing the underlying content, you'll simply shift to another compulsion, trading one addiction for another while the shadow dynamic remains intact. The seventh and perhaps most subtle sign is the sensation that you're not fully yourself, that there's something contained, unexpressed, living beneath the surface of your official life. You may have external success, stable relationships, all the conventional markers of a functional life, and still feel you're living in diminished mode, as if there is an internal switch that was never completely turned on. This is the shadow operating not through dramatic symptoms, but through silent subtraction, withdrawing vital energy from your conscious life to keep repressed material contained. Jung observed that what you don't bring to consciousness, you will live as fate. But there's an important corollary. What you keep in the shadow not only directs your life from outside, but also drains your vitality from within. Keeping significant aspects of yourself repressed requires constant psychic energy. It's like trying to keep a beach ball submerged in water. You can do it, but it requires continuous effort and takes your attention from everything else. When much of your energy is allocated to keeping the shadow contained, less energy is available for creativity, spontaneity, genuine joy, and deep engagement with life. You become functionally efficient, but existentially dimmed. And here's the cruel paradox. The very parts of you that were exiled to the shadow often contain your most vital potential. The spontaneous child who had to be suppressed may contain your capacity for joy. The rebel who had to be tamed may contain your creative innovation. The sensitive part you learned to hide may contain your capacity for deep connection. When you deny these parts, you're not just avoiding negative aspects, you're cutting off access to essential psychological resources. Many people reach middle age feeling something fundamental is missing, but unable to articulate what. They have career, family, achievements, but experience a persistent emptiness, a sense that life is happening somewhere far from where they are. This isn't necessarily depression in the clinical sense, it's the natural result of having lived for decades with significant aspects of the self locked in the shadow. And the only resolution is the process of reclamation, progressively bringing these exiled parts back to light, integrating them into the conscious personality, expanding who you allow yourself to be.
Recognizing these 7 signs is not the end of the process, it's the beginning. Awareness that your shadow is operating is the crucial first step, but real transformation requires systematic integration work. This isn't work you do once and finish. It's an ongoing process of progressively bringing light to the dark areas of the psyche, of reclaiming exiled aspects of yourself, of gradually expanding your capacity to contain the full breadth of human experience without denial or repression. The process begins with honest observation. When you notice a disproportionate reaction, instead of justifying it, ask, what is this intensity telling me about unprocessed material? When you catch yourself vehemently judging someone, ask, what quality in that person am I denying in myself? When you sabotage yourself, ask, what part of me believes I don't deserve success? These questions open doors. The next step is developing active relationship with the shadow through practices like dream work, where the unconscious speaks directly through symbols, or expressive writing, where you give voice to rejected parts without censorship. Deep therapy, particularly Jungian or psychodynamic approaches, can be invaluable because it offers a safe space to explore material that's too difficult or dangerous to confront alone. But fundamentally, shadow integration requires courage to question the identities you've constructed, to challenge the narratives you tell about who you are and who you're not. It requires willingness to be more complex, more contradictory, more human than the edited version of yourself you present to the world. And here's the radical promise of this work. On the other side of shadow integration isn't moral perfection or absence of internal conflict. It's wholeness. It's the capacity to contain all your humanity without denial, to access the full breadth of your psychic energy, to live with more authenticity, vitality, and genuine freedom. The parts you spent your whole life trying to kill don't die when you confront them. They transform, releasing the energy that was trapped in repression, making available resources that were inaccessible while they remained in shadow. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's unintegrated territory of your own psyche, waiting to be recognized, processed, and reincorporated into consciousness. Each of the 7 signs we explored today is an invitation, not a condemnation. It's the psyche signaling that work needs to be done, that there are aspects of you waiting to be reclaimed, that a more complete and vital self is available if you have the courage to make the downward journey. The great illusion of human consciousness is that you are who you think you are. The deeper truth is that you are much more, that you contain multitudes, that there are entire landscapes within you that you've never explored. And while those landscapes remain in darkness, while you live only in the illuminated geography of the conscious ego, you're living a fraction of your possible existence. The work of shadow integration isn't comfortable. It will take you to places you've avoided, force you to confront truths you've preferred to deny, require you to give up certain identities that were convenient but limiting. But it's also the most liberating work you can do, because each piece of shadow you integrate is a piece of yourself you reclaim from exile, is vital energy returning to your conscious life, is freedom gained from automatic patterns that were running your life without your knowledge or permission. If this video resonated with you, if you recognize some of these patterns operating in your life, subscribe to the Soul Mechanics channel to continue this journey of consciousness exploration. Leave a comment sharing which of the 7 signs you most recognized in yourself, creating a space of collective honesty where we can normalize this deep work. And if you're ready to dive even deeper into the mechanics of psychological transformation, explore our other videos on archetypes, unconscious patterns, and the anatomy of real change. The shadow will continue operating until you illuminate it. The question is, are you ready to turn on the light?